As you can see, it's another rainy day in the forest, but it turns out this is the perfect kind of day to talk about the highest performance Prius ever built. This is the new Prius Prime. Over 200 horsepower under the hood, over 50 miles per gallon if you treat it gently, over 40 miles of all-electric range, and 0 to 60 performance that could put some compact performance sedans to shame. Why is this the perfect day and the perfect time to talk about the Prius Prime? Well, I live off-grid, so all I have access to is solar power, and today, not a lot is going on. So it's the perfect day for me to drive on gasoline. This is the kind of vehicle where you can drive on gas when you need to and drive on electricity when you want to. I can charge it at work, charge it at home, wherever I need to, and if I can't, I don't have to worry because I still have one of the most fuel-efficient vehicles available in North America. Now's the time for me to eat my words a little bit. I remember a conversation from about a decade ago like it was yesterday. I was telling my next door neighbor, who was the proud owner of several Priuses at the time, that this is the kind of Prius Toyota should build, but probably never would. Because not only is it quick, it looks much better than any Prius that's ever come before. Actually, I think it's one of Toyota's best looking designs currently. It's not weird like the BZ4X, it just looks wedgy and sporty and more interesting than really anything else in this category, to be honest. We have these really distinctive big LED headlights here. Since this is a hybrid and a plug-in hybrid at that, not a lot of cooling is needed, so pretty slim grills down here. Not quite electric car-like, but certainly in that vein. And as you can see, that hood is really, really low, but as we go to the back, the roofline is pretty typical high. Thanks to the weather, you finally get a different view from my driveway, so yay for rain. Back to the Prius here. The wedge profile is really obvious from the side, as is a few compromises as a result. Less cargo room than we've found in previous generations of Prius, and a tighter back seat. When the Prius came on the scene in North America, the first one was kind of funky, but the second one and the third one, those really hit in North America, because they offered almost compact crossover-like cargo area with an enormous back seat and room inside that was really more like a Camry. But with this generation of the Prius, they wanted to go in a sportier direction, both in terms of styling and in terms of power, but still offer Prius-like fuel economy, and this is the result of that necessary compromise. You couldn't have this much power and still have the efficiency if it was boxier and bigger and bubblier than it was in the past. This Prius Prime is a fully loaded model, so we have these attractive 19-inch alloy wheels on it, but you should know that the tires are still 195 width. That's the same tire size we find on the regular Prius, even though this has the extra power and the bigger battery. The tail design is as attractive and restrained as it is up front. Because this model has the optional solar roof, which we'll talk about in a bit, it has 3 big panes of glass on top and then one section of sheet metal right there bridging from one to the other. This does not have a rear window right there, like we've seen in Priuses before. Instead, we just have this one on top, and that does mean that visibility out back is a little bit constricted versus other Prius models, but it makes the tail look significantly more conventional. We have this big LED light pipe that runs from one side to the other, amber turn signals, and again, pretty clean styling all the way to the rear. This remains a liftback or a sportback, whatever you want to call it, but it is significantly less hatchy, I guess you'd say, than previous generations of the Prius. You can see that the hatch opening here is only maybe about 9 inches tall until it hits the glass right there. So we'll talk about that in a bit. Keep in mind the cargo area is a bit smaller than you might hope. Most of the Prime's drivetrain is shared with the regular Prius, and that's because Toyota's classic hybrid system design, which is used by the Prius, the RAV4, the Crown, the Highlander, etc., actually adapts itself very well to plug-in hybrids and performance plug-in hybrids, interestingly enough. On this side of the engine bay, we find a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. It produces 150 horsepower in its own right. On the other side of the engine bay, we find 2 electric motors and a planetary gear set. Together, those 2 electric motors and the gear set basically function like a transmission. But because MG2, one of the motor generator units, is directly connected to the wheels, and it's the bigger of the 2 electric motors, all you have to do to operate in electric-only mode is put a bigger battery pack in the rear, and hey presto, you've got a reasonably powered EV. Now, about the reasonably powered part, the reason the performance plug-in hybrid system functions is because of that big electric motor, but you have to have a big battery to deliver that much oomph. And power dissipation is based on the size of the battery, the number of cells, etc. We don't have official confirmation from Toyota about how much power that electric motor can actually pull from the battery pack. It is rated over 100 horsepower, but in reality, it's probably delivering somewhere around 75 to maybe 90 horsepower tops in electric-only operation. I'll talk more about why we suspect that a little bit later. The battery pack in the rear is rated for 13.6 kilowatt hours, and it will charge at a rate of 3.5 kilowatts. So this battery doesn't take as long as some to charge because the battery is not as big as some, and that's because Toyota was very interested in efficiency. When you put everything together, this will give you 52 to 48 miles per gallon when operating as a hybrid, and right around 40 miles of electric range. That's going to vary based on the trim level you select. The important thing to remember about the Prius is that it is still very focused on efficiency, even though we get 220 horsepower total out of this system. And that's important because it doesn't use as much battery as you would need in, say, a big SUV. So if you're interested in finite resources and making sure you're not consuming more than you really want to, this is a good direction to go. It also has the benefit of just not taking as much power or gasoline to get you that same distance. So if you're taking a look at, for instance, a RAV4 Prime or some other plug-in hybrid, this is going to be even more efficient on both electricity sources. That means it won't take as long to charge, and it's not going to consume as much power. Clearly, it's time to jump inside and take a break from the rain. When you hop in, you'll definitely notice the lower roof line. If you're a taller person than I am, you might have some difficulties finding an ideal driving position if you don't like sitting really low. And that is the big thing with the Prius. On the outside, the dimensions are not far off the previous Prius, but it does appear to have shrunk inside depending on the dimension you're looking at because the seating position is so much more reclined. And remember that legroom isn't just distance between the seat and the firewall or where your feet go. It actually is this angle right there, including your knee. So if you're sitting upright, it may have the effect of giving a smaller car more legroom. But here, things are decidedly relaxed. And that hood, it's a really long way away, as is the base of that windshield. We have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with kind of an unusual setup here. Much like the BZ4X, the instrument cluster is kind of high there. Basically, you put the steering wheel low and you look above the steering wheel, not through the steering wheel at the instrument cluster. So if you're not a fan of that, you might want to look somewhere else. We have a power driver seat in this model with 2-position memory, but unfortunately only 2-way lumbar. And again, if you want to try and sit in a more traditional sedan position at 6 feet tall, my head's basically touching the ceiling, and this is the model without the moonroof. That brings us neatly along to the back seat. One thing I hadn't considered when I first looked at and drove the Prius Prime is that the size reduction means that we don't have as much room in the back, especially for larger rear-facing child seats. This is a Kleck infant seat. As you can see, it is touching the front seat back, which is not ideal, and that front seat is a little bit further forward than I would like. This really isn't an ideal position for the installation of a child seat, and larger ones definitely wouldn't fit back here rear-facing. Taller adults may also find it a bit constricting. Knee room is not really a problem, as you can see with that front seat adjusted for me in a fairly upright position. Mind you, I have about 4.5, 5 inches of legroom left. But the seat bottom cushion is pretty close to the ground, so you can see I'm not getting a lot of thigh support there. And really, my head does not have enough room to be perfectly comfortable back here on the side, unless I'm slouching a bit. If I'm actually sitting in this back seat like I normally would, I just have to crane my head to one side in order to fit back here. On the other hand, that's actually not unusual for a compact sedan. Most of the compact sedan competition, whether we're talking Civic or Elantra, etc., 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 they actually are pretty tight in the back, especially the Civic, thanks to its particular profile. Behind the power hatch, we find just under 21 cubic feet of cargo capacity, which is definitely below previous generations of the Prius. On the other hand, the Prius Prime has always had a fairly small cargo area, and this cargo area is actually bigger than the last generation Prius Prime, because this platform was designed from the very beginning to accommodate a bigger battery pack, and they were able to package it a bit more efficiently, a bit more logically in the back. So Prius Prime to Prius Prime, this is actually a solid benefit, but Prius Prime to regular Prius previously, this is going to be a bit of a bummer. And you'll really notice the difference with a bunch of different roller luggage. If I put this 22-inch carry-on sized roller bag on its side, you can see it just barely fits in there. That's how short that cargo area is. And there's really not a lot of room on top of it because everything else back here has really been slammed down in terms of its design. What I find odd about that is that under the load floor we find this huge foam divider here. Toyota could have given us maybe a slightly uneven load floor, but certainly a bigger load floor if they had just not used quite so much foam in the back. 2 words of warning today. As we look around the interior, keep in mind we are in the top end trim. Also keep in mind it's wet and muddy outside, and there's probably going to be water everywhere. Now, the model we're taking a look at now has the optional solar roof, which of course means you can't get a moonroof because that's where the solar panel is in the vehicle. I'll talk about that in just a moment, but it's certainly an option that I would get. We also get a little bit more headroom in here as a result. As you can see, this ceiling actually kind of bumps up there for improved front seat headroom, and it has kind of another bump up back there for improved rear seat headroom, but things are still a little bit limited just due to the shape of the car. We have height adjustable shoulder belts and height adjustable head restraints for the driver and front passenger. And again, you can see that rear-facing infant seat back there. The sun visors don't slide side to side, but they do have a very long extension that slides out. This is the vanity mirror over here and combination card holder, so you can put parking tickets or whatever in that little spot. The designers have long preferred imitation leather for the Prius, and that continues for this generation. As you can see, this seat has perforations in the center upholstery sections because these seats are both heated and ventilated. And then because this is the Prime model, we have red accent stitching and then these red accents on the side. And this is a two-tone red setup here. So we have the charcoal, the red, and then the darker red. Seat cushion bolstering is by no means aggressive in the Prius, but the bottom and back cushion are definitely more bolstered than they have been in previous versions. The doors are made from a variety of different materials, the softest of which is going to be in the armrest section right here. You can see it's definitely deforming under my touch. We then have a less soft injection molded setup up here at the top of the door, and then hard plastics down there at the bottom of the door. Remember that soft touch injection molded plastics tend to be heavier than hard plastics because they're essentially just a hard plastic under here, then there's a foam layer, and then there's the layer you're actually seeing on the doors or on the dashboard. And that's why moving over to the dash, we find one soft touch insert right here, but the rest of the dashboard is all made from hard plastics. A defining feature of the Prime interior is this big red stripe that runs right across the interior. It's an ambient light strip, and then we have that sort of burgundy trim strip in the dash. That's basically the same layout we find in the regular Prius, but a different color. Down here, we find a bin-style glove compartment. I was barely able to fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside. It really had troubles closing, so any of those thicker tablet computers or thicker cases, that could be a bit of a problem in that storage area. Then in the middle of the dashboard, we find one of 2 different infotainment systems. Since we're in the top end trim, we get the just over 12-inch display. If we were in the base trims, it would be a smaller 8-inch display running essentially the same software. As you can see, CarPlay takes over the entire screen, which is definitely my preference as far as smartphone integration in these systems. If we go back to the home screen, we have the dedicated buttons over here on this side for various functions like the navigation system there, music, phone interface, car settings right over here. We also have general settings over there. Now under this car option here, I should mention that solar roof again and how impressed I am at it. This vehicle has been in service for 6 months. It started in July of 2023. It is now January 2024. That solar panel has generated 106.6 kilowatt hours of electricity. That is absolutely fantastic. And that is enough to have driven this 476 miles just on the solar panel on the roof. And as you can see over here with this instrument cluster, total odometer is just 3,750 miles. So that is a pretty significant amount of energy that solar panel has delivered. At the launch event for the Prius Prime, I wasn't quite sure whether the solar panel would be an option that I would want, but turns out I definitely want that option. Down here we have a power button, a button for the 360-degree camera system, the automated parking systems right over there, controls for the single zone automatic climate control over here, lots of buttons, and toggle for that single temperature zone there. It definitely makes that easy to interact with. Down here we find a storage cubby, USB port for the system that actually works with CarPlay. You can go wireless or wired if you want to. The one next to it, that one is charge only. Then we have a little bit of a hidden storage compartment underneath that. 2 big cup holders there, lots of junk going on inside. A joystick style shifter here, drive is there. The enhanced regen braking right back there. Park is that button. And then the wireless charger is this slot right over here on the side. With thicker cases, you might have troubles charging. With this case, occasionally it would actually say it had an error, but keeping it pressed right in there, it actually does seem to work. Moving back from there, we find some of the other controls. These are the hybrid mode controls. So auto mode right here, and that basically uses whatever power source it thinks is most efficient. It will default to using majority electricity. Down here we have 3 different modes on this one button. Regular hybrid mode, EV mode, and if we press and hold, it will engage charge mode and charge the battery. The rest of the drive modes, those are handled with this toggle: custom, sport, normal, and eco. Down here we have the electric parking brake, auto brake hold, and the stability and traction control button. Between the front seats we find a padded armrest. Pop it open and we find 2 extra USB charge ports, enough room for something like a Sony lens right in there. Now to the decidedly controversial LCD instrument cluster. You're supposed to be looking at it this way, looking over the top of the steering wheel right there at that full LCD cluster. The LCD is a little bit smaller than I would like. That's probably actually my only real complaint. I think that it would make more sense if it was a bit bigger. The reason that it's this far away from the driver and this high on the dashboard does make some logical sense, because they didn't want to include a heads-up display. This is a whole lot cheaper. And by putting it so far away and so high on the dashboard, it's much closer to your eye line, sort of like a heads-up display would be, but the look definitely is controversial. It takes some getting used to, but I think most people will adjust. The design of the dashboard is a little peculiar as a result, but honestly a little bit less peculiar than in the BZ4X, because we have this whole thing, whatever that is, going on right there. Hard plastics as you'd expect all the way around this, but we don't get those weird swoopy side sections that you can see through like we find in the BZ4X. You can see really how long that windshield is and just really how pointy the entire vehicle is as it goes right there towards the front. The steering wheel is also similar to the one in the BZ4X. We have the driver monitoring system in this model right up there. On this side of the steering wheel, we find the controls for that multifunction LCD cluster, volume up, down, and a voice command button. There's also a phone button right up there. And then on the other side of the steering wheel, we find the controls for the standard radar adaptive cruise control. They do split the infotainment buttons, so mode is over here, track forward, backward, and then volume, that's over there on the other side. I'm sure you've all probably heard this by now, but the Prius Prime is properly quick. Just how fast? 0 to 60 in this model happened repeatedly in 6.3 seconds. That is faster than a Civic Si, and chances are, unless you're a professional driver or you've got a lot of practice and are prepared, this is probably faster than someone in an Acura Integra Type S as well, because the manual transmission there. Also the reason the Civic Si is not just a little bit quicker. Of course, in EV mode, it's going to be a lot slower, 10.5 seconds, 0 to 60. And that's because in EV mode, we're probably getting somewhere around 80 or 90 horsepower. It's worth noting that Toyota does not give an official horsepower specification for when this vehicle is operating in EV-only mode, but we can make some educated guesses based on the curb weight and the performance. Something like the 2016 Kia Soul EV that I had is actually a little bit lighter than this, had 109 horsepower, 0 to 60 was about 2 seconds faster in that model. So this is not exactly the speediest thing in EV mode. If you're worried about that sort of thing, you can just keep it in the auto mode, and if you demand more throttle, it's going to switch out of EV mode and then give you all that power. I know there are a decent number of people out there that think 10 seconds 0 to 60 is somehow dangerous, but I would remind you that humanity survived decades and decades with cars that were significantly slower than that. Now, there is one thing I should mention. I'm saying Civic Si, I'm saying Acura Integra Type S, and I am reminded, oddly enough, about the Integra. I think this interior is actually a little bit nicer to my eye in some ways than the Integra. Also like the infotainment system a bit more. This does not handle or stop like an Si or an Integra or a Type R. But you know what? It could. This is the kind of vehicle where I know this is going to be irrational. Toyota could create a GR Prius. Now hear me out here. It has the acceleration, I think, to make that somehow logical. Maybe they could give it 20 more horsepower, get it below 6 seconds. That would be fantastic too. All they really would need to do is improve the tires. Because if I slam on the brakes here, stopping from 60 miles an hour back to 0 takes a little bit too long. 123 feet, definitely longer than a performance vehicle. These are just 195 with tires. But on the other hand, the suspension is strangely well done. This does not become upset over broken pavement. It doesn't really have as much body roll or as much tip and dive as I had expected. And this is the kind of vehicle where it's pretty easy to drive it a lot harder than the tires really want you to drive it. Going around some of these corners, it's got a lot of pickup. The fact that we don't have a transmission to shift, it feels more like an EV. It builds power very linearly. But the tires, there's just not enough tire there. So If you put 245 width tires on this, obviously the fuel economy would drop down, but the handling would significantly improve, as would the stopping distance. Now, as far as the actual handling score goes, comparisons are a little bit tricky, so I'm just going to go ahead and give this a B. Obviously, that's going to depend on exactly what you're cross-shopping this against. If you're looking at a regular hybrid, this is not going to handle as well as a regular Prius. It's not going to handle as well as an Elantra hybrid or some of those other small hybrids that we're going to see shortly. For instance, the Honda Civic hybrid is returning. I expect that's going to handle better than this. It's probably going to be a sharper vehicle. On the other hand, it's not a plug-in hybrid, and it doesn't have this much power, so that makes comparisons a little bit tricky. Now, as far as compared to the Prius goes, this is an almost 500-pound heavier vehicle, 460 pounds approximately heavier, bringing the curb weight into about 3,600 pounds. This is pretty heavy for a compact sedan. As far as ride quality goes, this generation of the Prius and Prius Prime are significantly firmer than previous Priuses. That kind of goes with the sporty look and the sportier mission of this generation, of course. This is the kind of vehicle where, again, you could logically stick wider and grippier tires on it yourself and definitely have a much sportier feeling vehicle. You're going to have to give up some fuel economy for that, and you're probably also going to get more cabin noise. We should talk about that because obviously lightweighting a vehicle requires that they start deleting things, and one of the things that Toyota has typically deleted in the Prius is sound deadening. So at 72.5 decibels, this is certainly on the loud side even for a compact sedan, even some of the more affordable models. You'll generally find a quieter cabin in a Corolla or a Civic or an Elantra or whatever else you might be comparing this against. You'll also find a quieter cabin in the RAV4 Prime. When it comes to fuel economy, this gets an A+ easily. One of the most impressive things about this Prius Prime that's been true for Prius Primes since it launched is that this continues to be one of the most efficient vehicles, whether we're talking about gasoline or electricity, and they have combined that both into this one vehicle. That's interestingly one of the things I never liked about the original Chevy Volt, and that would be the hybrid one, not the current Bolt with a B. Confusing names there over on General Motors' side. The Volt was fairly middling as an electric vehicle in terms of efficiency, and also fairly middling as a gasoline vehicle in terms of efficiency. But it did give you a long range, which is what people really seem to be wanting, and better performance. This finally follows more of that performance mold where we get acceptable plug-in performance, excellent total hybrid performance, and longer range, but they didn't sacrifice efficiency on either front in order to get us that. And that's what I've always loved about the Prius Prime. In this, they just dialed that dial all the way up.
Even though the Prius Prime gets more power than it's ever had before, Toyota was pretty aggressive with their pricing strategy. It starts at $34,070 for the base SE trim that is going to get you the smaller LCD infotainment system, however, and will go on up to $43,435 before dealer-installed accessories. That's a pretty decent pricing range, and one that really puts the Prius Prime in a very unique and actually somewhat isolated position. The truest competitor to the Prius Prime in the US is no longer sold here. That was the previous generation plug-in hybrid Hyundai Ioniq, but Hyundai has decided to go in a different direction with their plug-in hybrid strategy and their EV strategy. Now the Ioniqs are going to be electric only, and there are going to be plug-in hybrid versions of different vehicles around, but it means that there's no direct corollary to this particular Prius. The lack of direct competition is the reason this list is so full of compact crossovers, because in the US, for some reason, this is the segment where we do find plug-in hybrids, compact crossovers, subcompact crossovers, and of course more off-road focused SUVs and luxury cars as well. But simply talking about Prius Prime priced like vehicles, let's dive into the Kia Niro first. Obviously, this is a small hatchback, not a sleek and sexy sedan. I like the look of the Niro, but I do think the Prius looks sportier and more aggressive. It's also going to be more powerful. This version of the Niro plug-in hybrid didn't really change the power dynamics of the vehicle too much, although they did give it better capability as far as the EV drive mode, longer range, and greater efficiency as well. If you're looking for a boxy and practical cargo area, you want to shop for the Niro plug-in hybrid. The very boxy dimensions of this hatchback mean it's going to be easier to put big, bulky items inside than in the sleek and sexy Prius, because the Prius's cargo area is more wedge-shaped, more horizontal than it is square and vertical like we find in the Niro. The drivetrain in the Niro is also not going to be as smooth. It's a dual clutch transmission with a single electric motor, so it is going to feel more like a traditional automatic transmissioned vehicle out on the road. The dual clutch nature with the big electric motor means that it's going to be a lot smoother than most DCTs out there, but it's still going to have that feel of shifting as you accelerate and as you decelerate, because it has to shift the transmission down as you roll to a stop. So things are certainly going to be smoother in the Prius. Also, fuel economy is going to be a little bit better. We get 34 miles of electric range in the Niro, and we get 48 miles per gallon combined once everything has been exhausted, once the battery pack is empty. That is definitely very good, but not quite where we find the Prius Prime, mainly because of the shape of these vehicles. Now let's roll through very briefly the sort of comparisons here. The Dodge Hornet plug-in hybrid, it's kind of a random one, but it is here in this segment, and you might be cross-shopping something like it, especially if you're looking for a cheap lease deal. $42,995, however, makes it notably more expensive than the Prius Prime, and that's the real theme when you start comparing the Prius Prime against the crossover competition. The base versions of the competitors are going to be similarly priced to the top-end version of the Prius Prime, but you are going to be giving up efficiency and, in general terms, probably the sleek and sexy design as well. You also may be giving up power, although the Dodge Hornet has 288 horsepower and all-wheel drive. All-wheel drive is one of the reasons you might want to take a look at some of the more crossover-shaped competition. Moving along, we have the Ford Escape plug-in hybrid. The Escape is probably not long for this world, but we do know it's available for 2024, and it's well priced, $42,640 starting. You're probably going to get a good deal on the Escape, and it's the only one on this list that will get some sort of tax credit if you purchase the vehicle. You won't get it on the Prius Prime or the Hornet or anything else because of where they're built. And the Escape plug-in hybrid, because it's built in North America, it will get the preferential tax treatment. You'll get 37 miles of range, 40 miles per gallon, but it's only front-wheel drive. There's no all-wheel drive version of the Escape plug-in hybrid. On the other hand, you do get about 50% more cargo capacity. Actually, a little bit more than that, probably closer to 75% more cargo capacity, just like you'll find in the RAV4 Prime. To be honest, the RAV4 Prime is the most direct Prius Prime competitor outside of the Niro. The RAV4 Prime is of course going to be right there on the same dealer lot, but you will certainly pay more for it than in the Prius Prime because it starts at $45,040. So there's about a $2,000 gap between where the Prius Prime ends and the RAV4 starts. On the other hand, you're going to get a significantly larger cargo area, nearly 35 cubic feet in that model. You'll also get pretty impressive numbers. About 40 miles of electric range and about 40 miles per gallon when the battery is exhausted. You'll also get all-wheel drive and over 300 horsepower. So the Prime models in Toyota's lineup are definitely very, very peppy in these latest plug-in hybrid models. If you want something that's a little bit closer to the Prius Prime, but a little bit more practical, closer to Prius Prime, I should say, in terms of pricing, you might want to take a look at the Hyundai Tucson. That gives you 261 horsepower for $39,810. So you could get into one for about the same price as a top-end version of the Prius Prime. And I do think that's a reasonable cross-shop there. You will, however, get less fuel economy. You'll get 35 miles per gallon combined and 33 miles of electric range. But you do gain a mechanical all-wheel drive system. Looks are obviously subjective. I'm not the biggest fan of the design of the exterior on this generation Tucson, but I do like its interior, and I honestly do like its plug-in hybrid system as well. You could also cross-shop the Prius Prime against something like a Honda Civic hatchback. In terms of general form and function, that's its closest competitor. Obviously, the Civic hatch is going to be less expensive, though, because it's not a hybrid, it's not a plug-in hybrid. $29,105 gets you into an EXL with the 1.5-liter turbo. You could get less expensive Civics, but they're not going to be anywhere near as powerful as the Prius Prime. And even that 1.5-liter turbo, it's not going to be as fast as the Prius. As I said before, you have to step up into a Civic Si to honestly be as quick 0 to 60 as the Prius Prime is capable of. Of course, the Civic is always going to be less expensive unless we're talking about that SI trim. It's going to top out at around $31,900, so definitely less than the top-end pricing of the Prius. But you will actually spend a bit more over the average ownership cycle, not just on future maintenance costs, which are likely going to be higher on that Honda Civic, also future repair costs probably a little bit higher as well, but importantly, fuel costs. You should save between $500 and $1,000 a year, according to the EPA, by driving the Prius Prime over a Honda Civic. That, of course, will vary based on the fuel prices in your area and what you're paying for electricity. If you're in a high-cost electricity state, then the delta is going to be closer to $500. If you're paying the national average for electricity, it could be closer to about $1,000 a year savings. That largely compensates for the price difference, to be honest. If you keep your vehicle over about 5 to 6 years, you should be net positive on the Prius Prime and just continuing to save money thanks to its lower cost of operation and its greater reliability. And bottom line, that's the big thing with the Prius Prime. It still sells on reliability, on high fuel economy, on the electric range, of course, in this particular model, but now it also sells on acceleration and decent styling, something that I never thought I would say about a Prius. If I were to shop in this segment, I would get the Prius Prime over something like an Elantra hybrid or a Civic, just the regular Civic, and then I would stick bigger tires in the Prius Prime, to be perfectly honest. I'd stick grippier tires on it because that's really what it's missing. Of course, style is subjective. You may not be a big fan of the interior, but for me, it's really just the level of grip delivered by the tires. I think the suspension is really well done. I think the vehicle could logically handle maybe 225 width tires on it. Something like a decent all-season tire would be fantastic. Yes, you're going to give up a little bit of fuel efficiency, but even if you gave up 4 or 5 miles per gallon, we're not talking about an enormous difference in terms of its performance on efficiency versus any of the competition. You'll still be way more efficient in the Prius Prime than a Tucson, than a Sportage or a RAV4 Prime, also versus a Civic or an Elantra or anything else in that compact sedan segment. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comments section below. Is the Prius Prime too little too late? Is it just perfect now? This is the Prius that I wish we had about a decade ago, maybe when we could have convinced people that something like a Prius Prime is a logical upgrade from some of those other compact vehicles, or maybe as an alternative to people that maybe aren't quite ready to go full electric. This could have been a good tiptoe step into that world. I'm just wondering if it's a little on the late side. Let me know down there, and of course find all the related content over on our Facebook channel. You'll also find us on Twitter, Instagram, all the other social places, and I'll see all of you next week.